Skype Zoom says we can start.
Okay, so here we
So,
are.
welcome, Clayton. It's very nice to have you. You know, like part of this podcast is me just trying to share some interesting people I've met through my journeys, and you may be one of the most interesting. So I'm very happy that you agreed to do this, and welcome to Miscellenea.
Okay, thanks for having me. It's interesting. I have a friend who, like myself, went to Toronto as a teenager with his parents, and he's back here, and he does something similar. And his rationale is that he wants to have interesting conversations with interesting people. And it's like, maybe because I'm a loner and I engage at whatever level I do, I don't sort of have that need, although I'm a regular on his Zoom meetings. And it's interesting, the kinds of people he collects, which are, very eclectic and always very interesting conversations. And I do believe that in life, we are born naked and empty-handed, and we leave with a suit or a dress on, which is not necessary, but also empty-handed. And I think that the only thing that we collect on our life journey are memories. They're intangibles. And it's those intangible memories and mostly memories and meetings and interactions which give meaning to our lives, I think. And the only thing we can claim to be our own, truly our own.
Yeah, I've heard I think it's a quote, I don't know who the quote is from, but it's, people will forget what you've done, people will forget what you've said, but they'll never forget how you made them feel, right? And
that is true, yeah.
I always talk about inspiration and how that never dies as well. And a lot of our journey as humans seems to come through relations with each other, right? And
yes.
That's why I think that, collecting conversations and having conversations with, different walks of life and people from all over the world is very beneficial for everyone to try and do, right? Especially if personally, I like to, if I bump up against someone I don't quite understand, you know what I mean? Then
Yes.
I definitely like to have that conversation just as much as someone like yourself who I do understand and admire quite a bit.
Right. And also, when you meet people who on the surface, life, or rather society, tells you should have nothing with, and then you make that human connection, it can be very mind expanding. And I'll tell you a little story. As a storyteller, I lived at Bloor in Brunswick, my first apartment. And my apartment was 7A, and there was a 7, and there was a 7A. We had like a common alcove. And one day the person in 7A knocked on my door and asked if I wanted to have coffee. And I said no. The second time she came, I said no, because she seemed disheveled. And I'm thinking, yeah, she looks crazy. Anyway. And then the third time I said, you know what? I'm going to get rid of her by going over. And I went and had coffee, and it was one of the more interesting relationships I had, because on the surface, we shouldn't have had much in common, except that at this time, both of our mothers were dying. She was going through a lot of changes. She was born in Rhodesia, of European parentage, Jewish. They were there because they were fleeing Europe. So there were a lot of issues around belonging and needing to connect. And I was the closest person at hand. And I found out later, the fact that I was of African descent meant something, because that's how she grew up. And I remember when we first met and we had dinner, she gave me a fork to eat with and then apologized for eating with her hand, because that's how she grew up. And she said when she was a teenager, her mom got her and her brother to sit at the table with forks and knives and told them, okay, this is why you're civilized and different to those people out there. But by that time, it was too late as a teenager, because she was more comfortable. But that relationship, that friendship, was very revealing to me, because it taught me that it doesn't matter, that beyond culture and ethnicity and education and all of the paraphernalia of civilization, there's something which is very fundamental, which has to do with being a human. And all of us need that connection, irrespective of our background. And that is what she was looking for. She needed that human connection, and we all need it. And that, I think, is the common ground in which we all swim or walk, the common ground on which we all walk. And it's very important. I mean, it goes back to what you said, it's how you're made to feel, that, define who we are and tell us who we are, who we are not.
Yeah, my story for how I kind of decided this was something that I wanted to do kind of with my life was actually, I think I was probably between 15 and 16. I had just kind of moved out on my own and had my first apartment. And at the time, I had a bunch of people who would just come to my place and hang out. And, there would be drugs, like lighter drugs, like acid, mushrooms, and like a lot of people smoking weed and stuff like that. And so there was one day, it was kind of funny because I think there was three people besides myself there, and two of the three of them were on LSD. And it was pretty early in the morning, like maybe like 11, or pretty early in the day, sorry, maybe like 11 a.m. And I knock on my apartment door, and I open it, and there's a pair of Mormon missionaries at my door asking if they could come in and share the gospel with me. And at the time, there was a Nine Inch Nails song called Heresy playing, and the chorus is just him yelling, "God is dead, no one cares." So here I am with these two Mormon missionaries, three of my friends in my living room, two of them off their heads on acid, and the apartment just smells like weed. So I tell them straight up, I'm like, guys, I don't think you want to come in here. I'm like, listen to the soundtrack. Those two dudes are on acid. Are you sure you want to come in and talk to us right now? They're like, that sounds like fun. Yeah, we would totally.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I'm like, all right, then come on in. So, kind of just to test their resolve, as soon as they sat down, I picked up the bong and took a big rip and kind of blew it in their direction just to see if that would make them leave. It didn't. And what ended up happening was I think they ended up staying for about 4 hours and
Wow.
speaking with all of us. And we had a beautiful conversation. And at the end of it, everyone was getting along, everyone was learning from each other, everyone got to share their points of view, and there was no fighting. There was no, bitterness towards each other, even though, one of the guys who happened to be on LSD was very much an atheist. So he was kind of like, giving his "there is no God" speech to these two Mormons, and the Mormons were expressing to him why they believe what they believe. And I remember, once the Mormons left that day, just being like, wow, that could have gone so badly.
Yes, I know.
And so I realized at that point that, anyone who comes along and says, hey, let's have a conversation, I'm going to give them that time. And, it's worked out quite well. I've done a lot of traveling by bus. And so you're stuck on bus for hours, and the guy sitting next to you decides to start commenting on something, and next thing you know, you're having a spiraling, beautiful conversation and learning something about another human you didn't know, and maybe some aspects of life you had never considered. So it's important.
I've had some really interesting conversations with people and people I meet, and something that has happened to me all my life is perfect strangers would walk up to me and tell me their secrets. And I decided when I left home, actually, I was trying to find, I have a little, I thought it was here, a little, it looks like a folder of some kind, and in it has tweaks and things you can cut tadpoles with. When I left high school, I went directly to Erindale College. And at the time, the idea I would be a doctor. And I remember we had to go down to the Credit River, I think it was, and catch tadpoles and cut them up while they were still living. And I thought, geez, this is not for me. And I now realize that that's what's very important, because they want to know, because if you're a doctor and you enter surgery, you have to cut living beings. So that was a way of trying to find out who is cut out, as it were, for it.
Pun intended.
So yes, so then I left Erindale, and my dad said, well, if you can't go to university, you can't live in my house. So we said our goodbyes. And but later I went to George Brown, and I went to George Brown to do a counseling program, because I thought, if people come to me and tell me their stories, and it happens all the time, maybe if I did a profession that was like that, I would be in my element. And so I went to a course for it. It was called Human Services Counseling, and I did my placement at the Donwoods, which is a little private hospital. And interestingly enough, after I did my placement, they asked me on to like be a volunteer, I think for 2 years, and I think twice a night, 2 nights in a week, I would go and run a group session with them. But one of the things I learned was the practical nature of an education in Canada. If you have a college degree, which George Brown is, you make a certain income. If you have a BA, it's another income level, an MA or PhD. And what I figured out, all it does, it exposes you to a different kind of person, a different kind of background, the higher up you go. Also, there's a kind of inversion, because you do the most practical work at the college level. At the PhD level, you're going to end up either lecturing or maybe being a psychologist or whatever, but you're not dealing with people who have, you know, centipedes on their wrists.
Centipedes, that's a good way to put it.
And also, at that level, the college level, you make minimum wage, although you're doing the most. And that was an eye-opener. And I thought, you know, this isn't for me. So I went to York to do psychology, thinking I'd move up the scale. But I got there and I did, I took an elective in cultural anthropology. And that course proved to be more interesting. This is the book that got me. This course proved to be more interesting than psychology. And I just realized this is Zimbabwe, and that's where my friend was born. And what this is, it's a book about the way in which the guerrillas, aptly or not named, people who were fighting the apartheid system, used the local religious animist traditions, appeal to that to get the population behind them. And this was so much more fascinating than psychology that I did a double honors in anthropology and psychology, and found I did a course in Japanese film culture and literature, which was even more interesting. So, but it just taught me something about the way the society is structured, that you have people who do the grunt work, who make the least amount of money, and those who at the top of the income level, they don't get their hands dirty. And that was quite instructive to me. You know, I'm never envious of people who have a lot of money or make a lot of money, because it's not like, for instance, there was a film company here and I was involved. I had a bit part in the film and I was astonished. These guys, you go on the set and it's a 12-hour day. And I'm wondering, how the hell do you do it? I went on the set one day. I got on set for 6:30 and they called me to do my scene at 20 minutes to 4 in the morning. And it's like, oh my goodness. So when you see people making, you know, lots of money, I think at the time, this was the late 80s, if you had a PhD, because there's a PhD candidate at the Donwoods that we were in the group, I think he was starting at something like $20-something an hour. But then, you know, if you're working for $10 an hour or $20-something an hour, you never have enough, because that's the way the system is designed, you know, because at $20 an hour, you're going to live in a certain kind of neighborhood, which requires a certain kind of rent and lifestyle and so on. So it's everybody is at minimum wage, or everybody is 3 months away from destitution.
So were you born in Canada, or were you born?
I was born here on the island that I am, which has quite a reputation. There are people here who...
Just for people listening, where is here?
It's the island of the island, two island states, St. Kitts and Nevis. And if you can imagine the Caribbean archipelago, which begins with Cuba and Jamaica, and it goes this way and then goes down to Trinidad, in that corner, it's where we are. On a clear day, you can see St. Martin, Montserrat. You can't see Antigua. And yeah, it's really interesting that what I find interesting, because I came home on a 6-month contract in 2004. And within 3 days, I knew I couldn't go back to Toronto. I have no rational explanation. And I know this has happened to other persons. There's a guy, he's an American guy, who came here to work in the hospital, and I saw him yesterday, not in the hospital, in the hotel. And I saw him yesterday. He's been here for maybe almost 20 years. You know? And I have a sister who, she's now retired from teaching high school in Toronto. And one of my sisters had returned in the early 90s. And from that time to 2004, when I came down, she had been here for 54 times. Because school would close on the Friday and the Saturday, she's here. I came down December and she came down in the March. And I'd gone through this very big upheaval. And she said to me, Clayton, I knew you would go through something like this, but I didn't want to tell you. And she said to me, when you go to Nevis, your soul goes to rest. And Nevis is good for the soul. And there are people like the island next door, you know, we all look alike, we're all same background, but they're like the people like night and day. And there's just a very different signature. I can't explain it. There's a guy from, an English guy who was here, but he has sold and moved. And I had a conversation with him, and he was telling me that I think his kids are in New Zealand, and he had a heart attack. But when he was in Nevis, he didn't need his medication. I've heard that, like people who are on pressure pills, when they come to Nevis, they don't need it. They don't need their. And if I'm walking down the street, there are people from Jamaica, Guyana, so on, from the islands. I can spot the Nevisians because it's just a different signature. They're very quiet, very deep. And there are people here with psychic gifts. I met a woman who told me that, yeah, this was part of Atlantis. But, you know, she would say that, of course, because you have to have an explanation as to why, you know, you come here and immediately some people feel that there's something different, something special. So, you know.
Yeah, I hear that about other places too. Like I was talking to someone the other day about Mount Shasta, and
yes, I've heard of that. Yeah,
people speaking about that, and there's I've heard it explained in different ways, but scientifically they're talking about like vector points of magnetism and that creating a sort of energetic vortex, yes. Which does, and like, you know, biology would tell you that, you know, the frequency of the area you're in will have an effect on you, right? So
yes, you
know, I hear stuff like that, especially like Southern Islands, you know, smaller islands like what you're on, where, you know, people do say, like, I feel like my age went backwards. I feel like I was starting aging backwards once I moved there. You know, various physical ailments going away and things like that. And just seems to be a little bit more harmony between people.
Yes. I mean, one of the things I've noticed here, you know, there's this cliche about people on islands are laid back and they're lazy or whatever. But one of the things I've noticed after spending more than 30 years in Toronto, it is extremely difficult to remain angry in a place like this. because you're surrounded by abundance. You're surrounded by such profound beauty. You've got to be literally crazy to remain angry at anything. It's easier to forgive and forget and get along. Mind you, when people become angry, they just chop your head off, The darkness is as deep as deep as the light. But there's something here. I remember once speaking to one of my managers. I worked at Bell for many years in Toronto. And she told me that she and her husband, they'd gone to St. Martin, which is not too far from here. And she said that during the middle of the vacation, they found themselves just sitting and looking because they didn't believe red could be that red, blue could be that blue. Because in Ontario, except for fall, you don't see a lot of pretty colors, especially if you live in the city. But to be surrounded by this beauty, it does something to your soul. It does something to your soul, and people here are very widely traveled, and there are a lot of people from this island who are born here. When I say born here, their parents are here, the grandparents are here, who are very accomplished. I have a cousin, she was recently asked to resign, who used to be the third ranking elected official in her state in the US. And her cousin, my cousin, just got appointed as an assistant secretary in the United States. And I once asked my sister, who had come back earlier, about it, and she says that the people here, Nevisians as we call them, are very competitive. But they're competitive not against anyone. They just feel they have to be the best at anything and whatever they do. And it's just a very different kind of mentality. And I know a guy who was an RCMP officer, he's from here, and he did a similar thing that I did. He came home on a vacation and he looked around and he said, okay, if I have a choice between -40 in Ottawa in February and 84, what do I choose?
Seems like a pretty simple choice.
Yes. One other thing I would
actually, when I was in British Columbia, because I had spent all my time in Ontario and then spent some time living out in BC, and just waking up to the ocean every day kind of humbles you in a sense, and
yes,
you can look out at that and be like, wow, like the immensity of it does something to your psyche, and it kind of, I do feel it. I think it's similar to being able to see the sky clearly at night when you can, you can see a nice array of stars. It kind of, in a way, puts you in your place, right? And so waking up every morning to the ocean, I would wake up and every morning, instead of like feeling the stress that I feel here of like, okay, what am I doing today? What's going on? What problems might I face? All of this stuff. I would wake up every morning and just be like, and it set a nicer baseline for the day.
It's actually something that I've started to do recently, is every morning go outside and walk barefoot, even if there's dew on the ground. Because actually a friend of mine just came back from Toronto this past week, the last weekend. She was there for 3 months, and she was telling me that her sister, who does kind of human coaching, told her that even when you walk on the dew, it's a better conductor for the electricity between the planet and you. Because you would think, oh, don't walk on the dew or whatever you might, but it's actually better. And I am sensitive enough to, when I started doing it, I can immediately feel the difference in my body, and we are led to believe quite wrongly that we are somehow separated from nature, and we're not. We are part of it, and we are so connected. I am absolutely convinced that I can communicate with birds. That when I meet an animal, when I meet a dog and it looks at me, from its point of view, it's communicating with me, and it's looking for a response. It's an unspoken response. And I mean, I had a cat, and that cat had a mind of its own, because I used to notice, like in winter, if I'm sitting on my sofa, it will come and lie so that its back is on my thigh. And I thought, oh, well, of course, it's my body heat. As soon as spring comes, I can't find it. It will never do that. there's a kind of reason there, there's a kind of logic there. And I just think that in a situation, in a place like this, and particularly if you live in the country in Ontario, there are more opportunities to connect to nature than ordinarily if you live in a metropolitan area. Although in Toronto, fortunately, there's so much greenery. I mean, you go downtown Toronto and look out, and you'd be surprised that you're in the middle of a city because of all the green and all the little parks you can find. I lived when we first came to Toronto, we lived on Euclid next to Harvard Collegiate, which is where I went. Then, interestingly enough, we had arrived in December, which is a particular kind of punishment for a teenager when you leave the Caribbean. And in February, there was a fire in the house. And I'll never forget this. Now, this was a Sunday morning, so we're up in the attic. That's where we lived. And we're saying fire. And there's a woman on Manning Street, which is the next street over. And she said, "Shut up, we know you're up there." And I'm thinking, well, yeah, call the fire department. Of course they had, but I thought, I soon learned that this is the Canadian way, don't worry about it.
So I'm guessing when you moved to Canada, it was like your family moved?
Yes.
Yeah.
Actually, my dad was a minister and was expelled from the church. And he thought that he would make his case to the people who ran the church, who were in the United States. I think they were in Cleveland. And he went to the States to make his case. And of course, this is the 60s. They're not going to listen to some guy from a little island. So he decided, I'm going to go back home. And he said, he may not see this part of the world again. So let me go over and spend some time in Canada. And I know he lived in Mississauga because I can still remember the letters he wrote home were from Clarkson. And this was in 66. And because Canada was turning, was it 50 or 167, it was announced that whoever wanted to could apply for landed immigrant status. And I think it took 3 years or something. So he did. And in 1970, his kids began to arrive. So, he passed away in 2017, all of us went to Canada, those of us who came back, because it was a way of showing gratitude to him and to Canada for giving us the life, the opportunities we had. So I actually spent 5 months in Toronto and between Toronto and Ottawa. And it was interesting, just the time between 2004, I'd gone back in 2008 for his funeral, but just to look at the changes in Toronto between 2004 and 2017, it is astonishing. And even between 2070, because I remember when I came, I remember my dad took us downtown to get our passports looked after. And at that time, there were only the 2 Dominion Bank buildings. Those were the only, you could walk across the street to something like a Becker's type milk store. And Becker's, only people of a certain age in Toronto, Ontario would recognize that name. But I remember when I was at Harvard, if you went to the top floor of Harvard on Euclid and looked out, you could see the Sikorsky Sky Crane putting the finishing touches on the CN Tower.
Oh, wow.
Yes, I remember when the Robarts Library went up. I remember, I can take you around Toronto and tell you what used to be here, what used to be there. And when I went back in 2017, I know for years there was this parking lot at Gerrard and Yonge. Yeah. Now, my sister she's had a place since the 80s across from Maple Leaf Gardens. So when I'm in Toronto, that's there's this building. I tried to look at it and I lost my balance. These 60-story buildings, where did they come from? It's suddenly it's like, wow. Toronto has really changed. And I met someone in Toronto, from Toronto, and they were telling me that a house on Roncesvalles was like $700,000. And I'm thinking, what, Roncesvalles? 700? I mean, the change that has taken place in Toronto has just been phenomenal. And in fact, that's changed throughout the world. It's the changes that we're going through, not only physically, but psychologically, and in terms of consciousness. It's just so astonishing. And it's in every single facet of life.
And only accelerating. I mean, yeah, I've had I've only been in Toronto for about 10 years now, and I've had the same experiences even in the 10 years I've been here.
Yeah.
I worked down on exhibition grounds for many years. It's been about 4 years since I've worked there, and I was going through that area the other day and realized that, you know, I would take this streetcar down Bathurst to get there, right? And once you got over the bridge, it was kind of wide open, and you could see the lake on every direction and everything else. Now there's condos on either side, stacked up 3 or 4 in a row, and you're like, it feels like you're driving down a tunnel now. It's very strange.
Right. No,
and then in the East End here, I had lived here for a while, and then I moved out to Scarborough for a bit, and then came back to the same area of Toronto. Walking down the same strip, it's like all the businesses are different. Maybe a couple of them stay the same, but like most of the businesses are different. There's now like houses built on top of some of the businesses. There's new condos that have gone up. I'm like, that only took 4 years, you know?
Right.
So I could just imagine, like, you know, while I was working for MLSE, which is Maple Leaf Sports Entertainment, I looked after what is now Coca-Cola Coliseum. It used to be Ricoh Coliseum. And on their suites floor, the upper floor of the place, they have all these old pictures going all the way back from like 1920 when they started building the X grounds, right? And even just the exhibition grounds, the amount of growth that has gone on there. And like Liberty Village wasn't there at the time, the Gardner wasn't there at the time.
Right.
I remember, like, it was one of my first days there going through all those pictures. It was the middle of the night. And then I went and stood out on this kind of little balcony area from the building that looks straight into the side of the Gardner. And I'm like, literally, this is where the picture would have been taken from. And all I see is the side of a highway. You know what I mean?
Right.
The structure of a highway, not the top. Like, I can't see the cars going by. I see the structure of the highway. I'm like, so this picture right there, you don't even have that view anymore. You know, like not at all. Like, you can't even see, you know, 100 feet in front of you, let alone clear across the city like this picture was depicting. So Toronto has had a pretty wild growth. You know?
Yes. And, you know, I wonder what it is, because my dad was born in 1917. If you told him, Charles, in 1922, Charles, you'll be able to, in your lifetime, to speak into a little thing made of glass and plastic. It will send a signal to a satellite 100 miles in the sky, and someone on the opposite side of the planet will hear you speaking as if they're standing to you. He said, no, that's not possible. And we take it for granted today. Yeah. And I keep telling people that we do not inhabit the same planet, and that they think that I'm speaking metaphorically, but I think that we have moved somehow. And this is just my point of view, and it will perhaps give you an illustration of why a lot of people listening to me said, he's crazy or he's weird. But I think that some of the experiences we have as human beings do not take place in the realm of time. They're changes which take place, as it were, in the twinkling of an eye. So that, you know, sometimes when you wake up and you go outside, you're living in a different world than the one you were in yesterday. But because of who and what we are, we don't recognize that. We just assume, oh, now we have cars. We didn't have them like 50 years ago. No one is going to say, you know, 20 years from now, people won't know what 50 years from now, people won't know what the internal combustion engine is. But they'll think, oh, no, that's okay. It's just a car. When I was at George Brown in the late 80s, there was a woman she was 40, one of my classmates, and her grandmother was alive. The grandmother was 94, and she went to the hairdresser every day too. And that lady was old enough to remember when she saw her first automobile. And my classmate told me it was in Hyde Park, and she said, how come that carriage is moving without horses? And I mean, this is in our own lifetime, you know, the kind of shock, cultural shock that we go through all the time. Like, I sometimes look at my library, and someone who was alive 150 years ago, the level of consciousness, let's say in Europe, a European 100, because I mean, that's the influence here, 150 years ago, the level of the depth of knowledge they have, what they knew, we're like aliens to them in terms of what we know, our experiences, you know, and we think that this is, I was going to say normal. It is normal for us, but as you said, the rate of change we are having on the planet, I think it's going to get to a point where there's going to be a critical mass, and that we will, in some ways, lose touch with our past, unless we have the memories. Like, I'm old enough to remember, like, I design furniture. I have a Bang & Olufsen turntable. And the young man who, when I get an idea, put it on paper, then I get someone to make schematics of it. The young man who made schematics, he was studying in England. When he came home, I brought him to my place to show him the result of his handiwork. And I remember taking out an album to put on the turntable. And I'm still shocked when he says, "What's that?" What, you know, what's that? It's like, but I am old enough to remember transistor radios, 8 tracks, 45s, albums. I remember when the first CDs came in. It's no longer there, but there used to be an HMV down by Sam the record man on Young, and one day I used to buy laser discs. And one day I walked in, I know, laser discs. One day I walked in and I noticed, hold on, they all look smaller. They're changed out, they're going to DVD, and I didn't receive the memo.
Yeah, I was born in 1980, so I'm kind of, I often say I'm like that last generation who got to see, you know, the progression from like 8-track and tapes to, you know, CDs, and well, laser discs came first, right? Like, I remember laser discs as well. They didn't take off like we all expected they would, but right. You know, that was a big deal. And then when the DVD happened, and then, you know, CD-ROMs with computers, I remember that edition as well, when you went from floppy disk. Like, we have floppy disks here at the house that we use as coasters, right? But someone actually, a friend of mine was by recently, and she had seen them, and she made the joke. She's like, I wonder if there's any information still on those. I bet you could probably sell them to people just for the mystery of like what's on the floppy disk, right? Because would it be, and like, again, the floppy disk, it's about this big, and it held like what, 2 megabytes of data. I've got somewhere here. Yeah, right here. So this is a flash drive I have. You can see how tiny it is. Right. That's a terabyte of data.
Wow. Yeah. No, it's really astonishing. For instance, I use IMAX. This is a hard drive from an IMAX. And fortunately, unfortunately for me, there's a certified Apple Tech on the island, because one of the things that happens here, the electrical current, it's not completely steady. And if you have an outage, when it comes back, it can blow your equipment away. The electrical company used to replace your computer. They no longer do that because they're just in the business of. Anyway, he was fortunate enough to go. I was fortunate because he was able to go in and find my poems, like more than 100 pages of poems on this. But, you know, I say you should have it on this. I print out my poems and I have them in a binder and I have them on a drive, because, like, you know, you have to do that these days because, I mean, technology changes quickly, but you still have to choose how you're going to archive. And because the technology can change so quickly, it's better if you have different modes of archiving your information. I remember when I was at York, I was doing a placement with a professor, and what they were doing, they had telescopes, and they were downloading information. And this was the early 90s. And I remember her telling me how many gigabytes of information they got down during the day. The problem that we're having is we don't regard this as a problem. The information in this book are the little letters on the page. And we tend not to think that the paper takes up space and volume. And what she was saying is that the software, the program that allowed them to get the ones and zeros was so large that they didn't know what to do. And they were, what do we do? Because, you can probably we can put all of these words on one page if we wanted to, but you still have this volume, this big, what do you do with it? Because it's not, what is important are the words on the paper, not the paper itself, but then you can't have the words without the paper. And that was an issue in the early 90s for them, like, what do we do? Because we're running out of space, and the information we actually need is like a small percentage, only a percentage of the space we need to hold the software on the computer. We have, these are in a way first world problems, but you know what, this is what I've discovered when I came home, right? When I left here in 1970, the difference between North America and here was, there was a chasm, but it doesn't exist anymore, because everything you can get in North America, you can get here. And not only that, because you have connections, like when my sister was coming down to spend her summer vacation before she retired, she would send a barrel of stuff down. And anything you can get from Canadian, if you want something from Canadian Tire, you don't have to go to Toronto for it.
Right.
I mean, I if you need a laptop or anything. So the world has literally become smaller in some ways, because it's distance has collapsed in a way, perceptions have changed, and the kind of, we're having, I think, to relearn how to interact with each other and with the planet itself. And in a way, part of that is being driven by technology. Part of that is being driven by something else, because we are part of the planet. And if this is happening, you have to assume it's also happening to the planet. So the planet is also in a way speeding up. It's time itself is, that reminds me of a line I have from a poem. Time itself turns to water to quench it stirs. This is a line of, I should let you know that I have 2 books of poems, 2 collections of poems. But I can't give the title because they're not available, because my publisher, which was a small imprint, went out of business because of COVID. You used to be able to get it online, get it through Amazon, but not anymore. So it wouldn't be fair to tell people about it. And yeah.
Well, this leads me into, one of the most interesting things I've discovered listening to you talk is I've had a lot of different jobs. I've done a lot of different types of work. But when I hear you speak, I'm like, you've done what? you were involved in what? So yeah, maybe, I don't know if you can literally list this all out, but maybe start from the beginning and run through all the various things that you've done to get yourself to here.
My dad used to call me, say I have the Midas touch. And because all sons and fathers never get along, I thought it was not in admiration, but just about anything I do, I do it well. And what comes to mind is one day I decided, that I'll take up horseback riding. And this happens to me if I decide to do something. Usually the person I choose is usually the best at. I don't know. That's just my good fortune. And it turned out my instructor that it was called Eglinton Ride. North of Highway 7. Now, if you go there, it's just built residence. And it turns out that the guy who was the instructor had been the captain of Canada's 3-day Olympic team at Bromont, like a year or two before. And he could spot something in me right away, which I only found out later. There was a crazy horse that they used, and he got me on it. And except for winter, in summer and spring and fall, we would ride outside in this big open. And one day, one of the first times, I'm on this horse, and the horse takes off at a full gallop. And I noticed the fence is getting closer and closer, and I'm thinking, what the hell's going to happen? And I was able to bring it to slowly stop and turn it around and go back. And then one day in winter, when we were inside, he's teaching me how to jump the horse. And it's over, I think they were called boxes, which were like a foot tall, just to get the horse. And he comes up to me once and he says, what did that feel like? And I say, oh, I don't know. Well, he said, do you realize the horse went 5 feet in the air? The horse was crazy. And then he said, oh, you have the ability to relax a horse. And when a horse is relaxed, it will lie and roll. Be careful you're not on it when it does like that. And I used to notice every time I entered the barn, all the horses would get excited. You hear them and they start. Anyway, so I did horseback, and he wanted me to become professional. Yeah.
There's a professional.
So I did that. Riding? What's that?
There's professional horseback riding. I'm kidding.
Well, yeah, you could. Well, he made it to the Olympics, and you can make money from it because there's dressage. And that was strange. There's something called an extended trot, where you get the horse, you collect the horse and you get it to trot, and it throws its legs, and you do it on the diagonal of the ring, because you get more space that way. Oh, it was astonishing, because when that happened, there's like no resistance. It's as if I became one with the horse, and you couldn't tell when its legs or its feet hit the ground. I was high. That was a natural high. But I did that. I went to the conservatory. I played the clarinet. I have a score of a Brahms clarinet autographed by Carl Leister, who came to play at the University of Toronto once, and I went to see him. Carl Leister was the principal clarinetist for the Berlin Philharmonic for years, which is to say, the best orchestra and so on. And I remember my teacher, who was from Bulgaria, we came and said, Clayton, you heard his tonguing. Clayton, you heard his tonguing. Which is, when you're playing a reed instrument, you start the sound by taking your tongue off the reed. And what I came to realize, because I was looking on YouTube of Carl Leister, and I think that guy was not using his tongue. He was actually controlling it with his breath, which is astonishing, that kind of breath, Anyway, so I did that. I went to Toronto School of Art, so I paint. I have, paintings here. I began writing many, many years ago, so I have a collection of poems. I run a couple of festivals here. I'm a part of a theater group, and I organize a theater festival. We had people in from overseas. That was interrupted by COVID. I run a poetry festival, which usually lasts for 5 days. It's part of a wider cultural festival. What else do I do? Oh, I design furniture. And so most of the pieces in my house, you know, they're pieces I design. I have a chair. What is interesting to me is not that I do all of these things, but it's what you learn if you're very creative. One of the things you learn is that, you know, everything you see around you, every single thing, whether or not it's a house, an automobile, a painting, a poem, it began somewhere. And that place is that wonderful world between your ears, the imagination. And one of the things we have, and it's because it's normal and natural, we think nothing of it, but it's phenomenal to me. Human beings have this astonishing ability to project aspects of their imagination outside of themselves and then inhabit the projection. We make it real, and that's what we call reality. But for me, reality is just one in a continuum of ways of being. It's a form of dream. And when I say this, people say, yeah, let's find the exit before this guy. But I mean, I do, because you can't spend all this time creating stuff without realizing, hold on a minute. And another thing you realize, everything we have, everything we make, began its life as dirt, or the earth, or the ground, or a plant. Okay? The shirt, this was a plant. And we are these wonderful, magical beings who have this, we're so inventive and creative. It's astonishing. Which reminds me, I was looking at a video, I think it was yesterday. I think I was going to send it to you. And it's a guy who is an expert and who is going to take us into the new reality. And you know what he said? We have to stop thinking of ourselves as being these mysterious beings. We are just animals who can be hacked, because he's talking about the use of technology to, I guess it comes on the transhumanism. And I'm thinking, what a little shit. This is someone you have to have pity on, because he is also a magical being, but for some reason he has forgotten that. And he thinks the magic lies outside of himself, in technology. And this is someone who is dangerous. Because if he was speaking to the people at Davos who believe they have power, you can, because if you're close to the center of power, you can make a form of reality. So if that idea is, you know, like, you're not a mysterious, wonderful, magical being, you're just an animal and we can hack you, that is such a denial of, first of all, who he is. That's a person who doesn't know who he is. You know, he does not have an appreciation, or if he does, he denies it, and he denies it in favor of something which can't even compare. I mean, he's just a lost soul, but I am utterly convinced that we are, first and foremost, astonishing creatures. And what we do is, all of it is wonderful. And all of it teaches us something about ourselves. And I'm going to say something that people might frown on, because I know it has been, you know, many, many years ago, she's now a filmmaker. And she was saying, because I was trying to tell her that, you know, what Hitler did is part of human experience. And she thought I should condemn him out of hand because he's bad. Well, he might be bad and all that. But you have to appreciate that we're capable. I have this saying, we have this odd combination of glory and bullshit, or light and dark. That's what we're capable of. And we have to understand that that's who we are. Because if you deny that we're capable of that, you open yourself to the possibility of not recognizing when you're becoming that thing yourself. And we can make a comment now about what's happening in our society. You know, most decent and respectable people look down their noses at what happened in Germany in the 30s. And how could they have done that? You know, these are the people who thought, oh no, that was all wrong, that was all bad. But I think that if we had recognized in ourselves, listen, that's something we're capable of, would we have been able to recognize it more readily now, rather than just say, well, you know, this is what is expected of us. We're just doing, you know, in a way we're stuck.
Yeah.
We're stuck in reality, stuck in the dream, because we don't know. Many of us mistake the dream for reality. And many of us use the word reality as though it were concrete only, without seeing the fact that it is constantly changing. It's like a river which flows and changes all the time. This song of that U2 has about stuck in the moment. A lot of us get stuck in moments. But you'd ask me about the things I do. One of the things I'd like to say, I mean, I'm involved in the theater because one of the traditions that the denomination that my parents belonged to was to have pageants, which were, you would take passages from the Bible and make plays out of them. And they were called pageants. They were morality plays, and they would be performed in the church. And I remember as a child making paper mache things with my mom. And I actually, you know what? She had a play, and there was hell. You know, there was a big cardboard partition that you went behind, and it, you know, it had red flames and blacks, and it said hell. And I remember my dad, he was overacting terribly, but he was one of the first persons to go in. And I thought, now I think, mommy. So there was that. So I can see a relationship between, you know, being involved in the theater now, being on stage, and that. Also, when I was born here, you didn't go to the store and buy your furniture. Every village had like what we call a joiner, and you had your bureau, your bedstead, your dining room table, and your what were called Morris chairs, which was the chairs for the living room, all were handmade. So it was kind of natural for me when I left my father's house in Toronto to go and get something made for my, yeah, and that's how the furniture and so on started. I remember I was at Toronto School of Art when I was doing a piece of furniture, and I met a guy there who had been to the Ontario College of Art, had done 10 years of apprenticeship. And he was asking me, oh, why don't you go to college to do this? And I'm saying to him, I said, well, you went to college, you did a 10-year internship, but I'm telling you what to do. I mean, we all have creativity, but you can't contain it in scholarship. You know what I mean? It's, and I'm very fortunate. I've escaped, not escape, I was always blind or arrogant or misguided enough to believe that what I think should and does take precedence over what everyone else thinks, which is why my father used to call me a rebel. Because obviously, you know, I'd ask him questions he would rather not have to answer, you know, like, why can't you be like the other kids and just shut up and do as you're told, which is, you know, it's what we're going through now on another level. Shut up, don't ask us about it. Just take your damn, you're going to be free. Don't you want to be free? Don't you want to be normal like everyone else? Shut up.
Oh yeah, as creative people, we bump into that a lot, especially when we're younger, you know. So
Yeah.
Get your head out of the clouds and put your feet on the ground, you know. So I always loved that part of Never Ending Story, and the fact that they started the film that way, with that conversation between the father and the son, where, you know, you need to pull your head down out of the clouds, get your feet on the ground, and that kind of is a theme of the movie. But then at the end of the movie, it kind of shows you that if his head isn't in the clouds, bad things are going to happen, right? So
right.
There is a balance that you have to find in order to, you know, be creative and still exist in the world. And
Yes.
not all of us find it. Some of us, stay in Creativeville and our regular lives fall apart, or maybe we're lucky enough to have a partner who will hold that stuff together for us so that we can go off into our creations and not have to worry about it. But I
Uh,
think that society has been kind of pushing us over the last, I don't know what amount of time, the last several years, to you know keep your feet on the ground at all times, keep your head out of the clouds at all times, right? And I've seen a decline in certain levels or certain aspects of creativity in society, especially when it comes to, movies. Movies is a big one. Like I'm finding a lot
yes.
of the better creators out there, content creators, or people just working for themselves on YouTube. You know, maybe comedians isn't as funny stuff mostly, right? Like I haven't seen a movie that I thought was legitimately funny in a long time, but like there
Right.
are hundreds of comedians just killing it online right now that are
Yes.
hilarious to watch, right? So
Right.
I
Right.
think that just as the mediums have changed, the tools have changed, times have changed, it's we're at a place now where we need to reimagine creative output, right? Like
Yes. Yes.
the internet has given us the ability to take a lot of the gatekeepers away. Like I don't need to go to Random House to get my book published. I could do it myself, right?
Yes. Exactly.
I may
Yes.
not have the push behind it, but I can. And if I take that job of giving it that push, I could potentially have just as much success. It's the same
Yes.
thing with art. I mean, it
Yes.
used to be like, a painting in an art gallery. That's the only way you're ever going to see it. You can't find pictures of it online. You can't go to the artist's website and download prints of it or anything like that, or like maybe save it as a screensaver on your computer. None of that was available. Now that it is, I mean, we've had a massive output of, you know, creative people finally having an avenue again to create new things. So it's
Yes.
almost like, if you think of like creative uh, ingenuity, I guess, had gone up for a while and then kind of dropped off. And now that the technology is allowing, every kid in their bedroom to do a lot of these things, now
Yes.
we're just starting to see it take off again. And like you said, like it all starts in here with imagination. I mean, and maybe some of the people listening to here don't. Like I teach magic, and the three components of that being imagination, will, and conviction, right? But without that imagination, it doesn't matter how much will or conviction you have, and imagination is something that for a while we had lost, right?
Yes.
We had it kind of almost taken away from us,
Yeah.
but now we have an opportunity to rediscover it. And
Right.
I'm really curious to see what happens, say, over the next 5 years in terms of movies and music and art,
Yeah.
and what directions they take because of the availability of it. And like you said, the world's got smaller, right? Like even if you just think of I remember I used to go to an aunt's house, and she used to live out in the middle of nowhere. But if you go there today, there's houses all over the place. Like it used to be, you would drive like a good half an hour without seeing another human being. Now you can't go 3 minutes without seeing another human being, right? So geographically, we've gotten smaller, and then the internet, of course, has reduced everything into one web, quite literally.
Yes. Yes.
And I think we're now just starting to see the potentials of that. But like everything else we've been talking about, there's potentials in both directions, light and dark, right?
Yes.
And so we have people like the one you were mentioning, who thinks that we're just animals who can be hacked, right? And
Yeah.
then because of the internet, an idea like that has legs that it wouldn't have had back in the 80s, right? Like
Yes.
I
Yes.
remember growing up through the late 80s and 90s, and going to a lot of like lectures at libraries and stuff like that. But like you'd have to watch the schedule and really hope that some speaker happened to show up at this particular library, right? Whereas
Yeah.
now I can go on YouTube, of course, and find that speaker anywhere. So
Yes.
I think we're encountering a struggle between an oversaturation of information,
Yes.
and because we had no real education in critical thinking and discernment, and even just morality has been kind of not been being taught for quite a while, with
Yes.
like
Yes.
there's death,
Yes.
and putting death of religion, and putting God as a concept on the back burner for so long.
Yeah.
A lot of teenagers today, they don't, first of all, they've grown up and the internet has been here their whole life, right? Like both of my
Yes, yes.
kids were born after the internet was a thing. Neither one of them know what life is like without the internet, right?
Right,
And,
right.
and it's kind of a funny thing because we take it so much for granted. Like I remember when I was a kid, there was like a family phone call day, right? Where like, maybe it was Thursday nights, we called grandma on one side of the family and everyone passed the phone around. We all said hi, right? Even if it was just like, hi grandma, I love you, miss you, bye. Pass the phone back to mom, right?
Yeah.
Now we have all this technology like the one we're using right now.
Right.
And we do use it, obviously we use it.
Yeah.
But we don't use it in the same way we used to, because another thing that has happened during that point in time is the family unit has been kind of ripped apart and
Yes.
replaced by the internet, right? Like,
Yes, yes, yes.
and now because of, and again, on this program, I try to avoid the words that are associated with what's going on in our world right now. So I talk about the joy being the affliction, a
Yes.
lollipop as a way to get, and then people who don't want the lollipop are sugar free.
Yeah.
Now that has hit, and like, kids aren't going to school, kids aren't having that, like we're actually being told to social distance, right?
Yes.
So that everything's pushing us onto this technology, but we still haven't caught up with a healthy use of the technology.
But something that has made me given me pause for thought. My siblings in Toronto have sent down recently stuff. We get stuff from Toronto, and included were alternative helpings: zinc, magnesium, D3, which apparently all help in the joy. And one of the things I'm discovering, because I heard of a woman here who was had both lollipops and got tested, and it was positive. And she went home, and what she did was got ginger, turmeric, and garlic, drank that, and she was okay. And one of the things I'm discovering now, I worked in the hotel industry when I came home, and one of the things you find out is that because we have an influx of people from North America around Christmas and March, if you work you're going to catch cold, because they're leaving from Los Angeles or wherever, and they're in this little plane, and you will catch cold, but you can't afford to catch a cold and be off work, because that's when you make your most money. So you're accustomed about that time to have your vitamin C's and push your immune system up. One of the things I've discovered is that people are taking an interest in their health in a way they didn't before. Like, I mean, I do, because, I was involved in that, the vitamin C and so on, and my oranges and so on. But I don't think I would have taken magnesium or D3. I mean, you get it from the sun anyway. And that's what I've noticed. There's like, I drink regularly. I was contact traced with someone who was positive. And after they pushed the snake up my nostril, I figured, oh, so that's where it is. So what I do is I get seawater and bring it up my nose so that it goes down, or I steam. I wouldn't ordinarily do that. And even if you don't have it, it's a good way to detox yourself. So one of the byproducts of this, which I'm sure the people involved in, telling us what our future will be, I don't think that was their purpose. But a lot of us are becoming more and more aware of the need to remain healthy all the time. And that, I think, is, this song by Leonard Cohen is one of my favorite Canadian guys. There's a crack in everything. That's how the light gets in. And I think no matter how perfect you try to create a world, especially if it's a contrived world like the one that's being built for us now, there are always ways to get around it, because there's always a crack. And what you have to do is to look for the light and stand in that light,
Well, it's because we have free will at the end of the day. I
Yes.
always use that phrase. It's not what happens to the being, it's what the being does once it happens to them, right? So just like I was talking about the internet as like a tool, you can use it to go to the dark side, you can use it to go to the light side, but in the middle of all of that is a choice, right? So
Yes, yes, yes.
just like with this, you can hear what's going on, and you can start paying more attention to your health. You can start exercising. You can start watching your diet. You can start supplementing with things. Or you can allow it to depress you, and you can drink all the time, and you can eat pizza every day, and you can have McDonald's for breakfast every day. And,
Yeah.
the choice is kind of yours. Obviously, that's what got us here, right? Is
Yes.
that a lot of people weren't making that choice for themselves. They were just kind of following, you know, and so, yeah, I think that the way I see it, because I like a lot of history, and I see these cycles that we go through, these kind of
Yes.
rise and falls of civilization, if you will.
Yeah.
I think this will be the first time where we don't necessarily see a fall of civilization, but like, if you imagine like this is civilization, just a straight output from it, like a bunch of
Yeah.
people who are just like, okay, well, I see what's going on, and I can't change it because you don't have that power over the whole world, right? But
Yeah.
what can I do now that this is the situation?
Right. Right.
And I can
What?
either start looking after my health, or I can allow my mental health to deteriorate my health.
Yes.
And the
Yes.
choice is
No.
mine.
That's what I think will happen, because I don't think that the world is going to be the people, let's call them the controllers or the Schwabists. I don't think those people, they would like a monolithic world, but that's not in the cards, because we've had the internet. We have a increased individualization of everything. And it's like, if you look at what's happening in the United States, it's like Florida is like, okay, is it still a part of the United States? There's always choice. And now, when Southwest Airlines, the people walked off, and apparently air controllers walked off, it was like, oh no, it's the weather. And now another airline has done that. So, it's blue skies, but somehow the weather has made them to cancel. People are realizing that you have choice. I saw it was in Italian, some from the former Yugoslavia, some members, MEP, members of the European Parliament. They were astonishing in their, like, we have choice. This is the contract that was signed between the leaders and Pfizer or whoever it was. And it's like 10 pages of all blacked out. And he says, is this transparency? And when people who are part of the establishment begin to ask these questions and ask them in public, the Schwabists have more on the hand than they can handle, because it's not a monolith. And I think that what we are heading for is multiple options, which will drive certain people crazy, the Schwabists, and people who are accustomed to just follow, because now you have to be more responsible for your choices. And to me, that's a very good thing.
Yeah, the responsibility is, it's if I've been critical of people, I often call them irresponsible, right? Like, a lot of people don't like to have to make their own decision. They don't like the fact that between the dark and the light is their choice, right? They're like, oh no, I'm this way because so and so made me that way, or such and such made me that way, not because of choices I have made or moves I have made. It's my daddy spanked me too much, and my mom was never home. It's the government's doing this to me. It's my teacher was an asshole. It's whatever our excuses is. That excuse comes from a responsibility we don't want to take. And I think that what we're seeing right now is, the the result of too many years of that, right? Where it's like, our governments are more or less stepping in right now and being like, oh, okay, you don't want to take responsible for it. You just want to be overweight, eat McDonald's, and not look after your health. Okay, well then we have a solution. Right? We're gonna put you in these boxes, and we're gonna control every aspect of your life, because clearly you can't, right? And I think it's putting people, those of us who can, in the position where we have to walk the talk, right? We have to
Yes.
show them that we're fine. Like, as an example, this is a bad example maybe, but here in Toronto, especially, I'm sure it's happening in many, many other places, but you're hearing people saying that, you know, if you catch the joy and you refuse the lollipop, then you shouldn't have any type of health, right? Like, which
Wow.
is kind of ridiculous because, well, and I guess where I'm going with this is more like our opportunity then is to be like, okay, well, then I'm going to look after my own health to make sure that I don't need to go to the hospital, right? So to make sure that I don't need that extra help.
Right.
And what does that show the world around me? That shows the world around me that it's possible. But it also just shows that I'm going to take my own responsibility for this. And I think that a lot of other people need to step up in that way and be like, you know what, I'm going to be responsible for my own health. Not to say that, like, you know, there's emergencies, we all need medical intervention at some point, but
Yes.
there are a lot of ways to avoid going to see the doctors, right? Like, the last time I was ever at a hospital, it was because I had a broken infected tooth.
Mhm.
And I can remember everybody else in the ER had the cold or the flu. You know, there wasn't any
Wow.
broken bones, there wasn't any open wounds, there wasn't any of this. Everybody had the cold and flu. And so I had to wait hours and hours and hours and hours to see a doctor. I'm in
Yeah.
gross pain, like just terrible, terrible pain. But I had
Mhm.
to wait and I had to wait and I had to wait and I had to wait. Why? Because this ER is full of people who aren't responsible enough to understand A, how to look after themselves to maybe avoid that, and then B, what to do once it happens, right? Like there's
Right.
a lot of remedies at home. We don't need a hospital for cold
Right.
sickness. But people have
Well,
kind of become so irresponsible and so used to that luxury of being able to just go to the doctor, get that quick fix, not have to think about it or do anything themselves, that we abused that system. We overwhelmed that system. And now they can use that and throw it back in our faces, right?
exactly. You want to be free? Okay, this is going to cost you.
Yep.
But that brings up something which is really interesting. The last allopathic doctor I went to was in 1983 or 84. That has something to do because when I was born, here the system was of of remedies was community based, in that there was always someone around when you were ill, and it was preventative. Before the rainy seasons, all the kids got cleaned out. Oh, that was awful, you know. And you grew up taking milk of magnesia, ferrule, you know, things to fortify you. That's how I grew up. And I used to come, I was born with a cold. That's what my mom told me. I produce a lot of mucus. And when I lived in Toronto, I figured if I came south in February, I'd do myself some good. And I remember I went to Carnival in Trinidad in the early 80s. I caught a cold, you know, and I came back and I went to see my doctor, and it was at Bathurst and Bloor. And I remember I went home with this dark bottle filled with a liquid. And I remember looking and thinking, what the hell is this? And I went and I found a homeopath. I still remember his name. I won't call his name. He was in a house at, and it's an interesting story, St. Clair West. And he sent me to Thompson's Homeopathy, which used to be on Young, just north of Bloor. And when I was there in 2017, they're now out in the West End, because they, like in Toronto, you know, if you want to make $1 million, sell your family land that you've had since the 50s, or if you've had it on Young Street. And they gave me some, I don't know what it was, Calibic, I think it was. And I started taking it. And it took a long time to work. And I brought stuff out that it was almost black. But I didn't have a cold for about 10 years after that. I went back to see him some time ago, not some years later. And he was in a building on Young around Davisville. It was like 12 stories, and it's just complete doctor's office. And I had a conversation with him, and I said, you know, like, why? He said, the analogy he gave was very important. He said to me, he was of Japanese descent. He says, Think of it this way. If you're going to go to Ottawa, you can jump on the 401 and be there in so many hours, or you can take the scenic route. Homeopathy is the scenic route. But you said people in North America don't have time to take the scenic route. Everybody wants a quick fix. Okay? Also, you can't really support yourself along the scenic route. There's more money in the quick fix. Very instructive because in a way, I don't know his personal expenses. He probably would have had young kids and his wife who said, listen, homeopathy might be, but hey, we've got a more, we have these choices, but we always, as you say, it's always between light and dark. We might feel that circumstances are choosing for us, but that is never the case. But it was very, very, very instructive. So when I had to come for the lollipop, it was like the question I asked, like I've never taken a leave or Tylenol in my life. Like people kind of laugh at me because if I have a headache and they say, what are you taking? I said, nothing. Headache will go eventually, like no one has a 10-year headache. And I know enough about myself is if I have a headache, it's either because I haven't eaten or my sugar level is up or down or whatever. So I know something about, and what has surprised me, because the culture here was community-based, what has happened is that expertise has been taken out of the mostly women who had it in communities and placed it in experts, who I learned when I went to George Brown, drug pushers, because, the pharmaceutical companies come out and tell the doctors, hey, you see this thing? This is the latest thing. Try it yourself and see how effective it is, okay? And then when your customers, your patients come in, you just give them 2, why not 3 or 4? And what we were told, actually, when you go to a doctor, actually interview the doctor, because many of these guys, unfortunately, when they take this stuff, they're addicted. And the public doesn't know that. And you have to, so when this thing came up, it wasn't like, oh, yeah, it was like, one other thing I would say about this, I met a guy through the work I did at the hotel who was in his early 40s. He had been a CEO of a drug company and he left. And I asked him about it. And he said to me, he couldn't deal with, these aren't his words, with the moral corruption. He said that there were remedies on the shelf that had been on the shelf for 100 years that they will not release to the public. And he said that if a disease developed in the so-called third world, they will never make a pharmaceuticals for it. Because the third world, they have to sell it for $2, $3. They wait until a version comes to North America where they can charge you $700, $1,000. Because in the end, the pharmaceuticals, let's not be shy or modest, Pfizer, Moderna, are in the business of making money. Billions of dollars. You can't blame them if that's what they're doing. It's up to you and I to take responsibility and say, well, I don't have any stock in Pfizer, so why should I contribute to the bottom line? That's not my health is not their responsibility. It's mine.
And now I have to cut all of that out because, as you know, this podcast is sponsored by Pfizer.
Oh, right.
Right?
Have you seen the thing where everything is sponsored?
Oh, yeah. It's literally like every news broadcast, every kind of government agency's advertising. That's all paid for by these major drug companies, right? And that lack of personal responsibility, people don't know how to ask themselves that question. Well, if they have that much of an invested interest in this outcome, then of course they're going to push us towards that income, that outcome, right? It's like a certain, I won't name it, but a certain medication that's being used to treat the joy Nobody makes any money off of it, right? And
Right.
it's generic, and you know, you
Yeah.
get it for like you were talking about the third world solution, like being that $2-3.
Yes.
That's not it. But now those same companies that you mentioned are basically repackaging that same medication
Yes.
so that they can sell it in North America in, you know, to
Yeah.
combat the joy. And
Yes.
why would they go? Well, because now they can make money off of it. And yeah, the clip you're talking about, it's just, you know, news program from all these different news network, all these different, like even the royal wedding is one of the things.
Yes. Yes. I saw that. Yeah.
And then it's all, and sponsored by Pfizer,
Yes.
sponsored by Pfizer,
I know.
sponsored by Pfizer. You know,
I'm thinking of getting a T-shirt which says PFUCK PFIZER.
well, as a writer, I'm always trying to take, you know, overwhelming amount of experiences and condense them down into, you know, a paragraph, a sentence, a line.
Yeah.
Maybe one day I'll even get as far as a word, to try and distill a bunch of different information and learning into, you know, one kind of easy to grasp concept.
Yeah.
I'm gonna turn that on to you. You're a man who has an incredible amount of different experiences with different people and different mediums.
Yeah.
If you know, I don't know if you have children, but if let's just say you had, you know, a young child in your life now who was kind of looking to you for you know, education, inspiration, all of that, what would you tell them?
The first thing I would teach that child is that the most important thing they can do for themselves is to listen to their inner voice and obey it, and to discover what happens when they disobey, what happens when they obey, so that they learn from their own experience. Because for me, that has been the pivotal and essential learning for me. And it can be as simple as, you know, I'm going to make a call to a friend. And as I'm walking to the phone, something says to me, oh, don't call. But I want to make the call. So I call anyway. And I found out there's no answer. Or I found out the answer, but they can't talk. If I had listened to that inner voice, I would have avoided that negative. Now, it's very light, very on the surface, but our experiences are built one block of experience at a time. And at some point, that might include not taking a trip, not going in your car, which might lead to an accident or your life, a serious injury. And learning how to respect your inner voice, your inner vision, your who you are as a person, and working out, seeing how it works, and developing the joy of doing the right thing by yourself. That's what I would teach them. That's a hard lesson for a child to learn, because a child is, they're very manipulative. Oh, they cry, you'll pick them up and you tap them and hey, I'm happy. And that's what we all do, you know. You put it on their breast because that will shut you. And you learn, if you're involved with a woman and you're getting upset and she comes up to you and gives you a little peck on the lips. That's when I'm saying, shut the F up. But you don't, yeah. But it's only if you're smart and you think, oh, so that's what she did. But, teaching that child that they are responsible for their choices, I think, is the most important thing you can do to help any human being.
I agree, and thank you for that. I think we can kind of end this recording at that. And
yes,
thank you very much for doing this and sharing some of your experiences. I know we could probably do 30 of these, and you would probably never run out of stories, which we might have to do.
I've been known for having 5-hour conversations.
Yes.
Yeah.
But either way, you and I will be in touch. And thank you for sharing yourself with the people here in Miscellenea today.
Thank you.
All right. I'll
Okay.
stop this and bye, everybody.
Bye.